How at that big a chord? No, nobody could predict that. But it was something we were proud of at the time.
What if I told you one of the greatest albums in rock history almost started as a complete disaster? A failed live show, broken equipment, strange studio experiments, and a band pushing themselves to the edge somehow gave birth to Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. Add in lawsuits, eerie, unscripted voices, hidden myths, and one of rock's strangest fan theories, and this story gets even crazier. So how did total chaos turn into one of the most legendary albums ever made? Back in 1971, Pink Floyd locked themselves inside a London studio for 12 intense days, piecing together a strange multi-part music project called Eclipse. This early version was built from leftover song ideas, unfinished fragments, and bits they had been sitting on for a while. David Gilmour told Classic Rock, "We had quite a few pieces of music, some of which were left over from previous things." Roger Waters remembered it a little differently, saying, "I think we had already started improvising around some pieces." Even at that early stage, something bigger was starting to take shape. Waters had already written some lyrics, and those scattered ideas started connecting into one bigger concept. Then Waters had the idea that changed everything. He explained, "I suddenly thought, I know what would be good to make a whole record about the different pressures that apply in modern life." That concept became the backbone of the entire album. In the end, Waters wrote all the lyrics for the final record, shaping the emotional direction from start to finish.
When we'd finished making it, I took a 1/4-inch home and I played it to my then wife, and she burst into tears.
After less than 2 weeks of intense rehearsing, experimenting, and locking the music into place, Pink Floyd felt ready to test it in public. The project was renamed Dark Side of the Moon, a piece for assorted lunatics, and they took it on a 16-show tour to see how audiences would react. But the very first performance turned into complete chaos. The band planned a massive electronics-heavy stage production packed with lights, effects, and technical tricks. Instead, the equipment completely fell apart. Malfunctions kept piling up, the sound glitched badly, and the whole thing became such a mess that the band pulled the plug only about 30 minutes in, right in the middle of money. Even after that disaster, Pink Floyd knew they were onto something huge. Instead of giving up, they kept performing the material live, tweaking songs, changing arrangements, and sharpening the entire experience night after night before ever stepping into the studio for the official recording. One key piece came together late in the process. The song Eclipse, which had originally been planned as the title track, was added later during the tour. Waters recalled, "I can remember one afternoon rolling up and saying, 'I've written an ending.'" That last-minute addition helped complete the shape of the album. At the time, Pink Floyd was so busy refining the project on the road that there simply wasn't time to properly record it yet. Pink Floyd's 1972 schedule was absolutely brutal. While building what would become the Dark Side of the Moon, the band was being pulled in every direction at once. They had major tours lined up across Japan, the United States, and Europe, while also working on the soundtrack album for the film Obscured by Clouds. There was barely any room to breathe. By early 1973, after all the non-stop pressure, the album was finally completed at the Beatles' legendary Abbey Road Studios in London. It was a massive achievement, especially considering everything happening around them. Life on the road, constant deadlines, and the usual rock band stress could have easily wrecked the whole process. Behind closed doors, Pink Floyd was no stranger to conflict. Creative disagreements and personal tension were part of the band's reality. As one member admitted, "We have some pretty good arguments from time to time, yes. But strangely enough, despite the album diving into themes like pressure, fear, and mental strain, the recording process itself became one of the band's rare periods of real creative unity. For once, Everyone seemed locked in on the same mission. Then came one of the album's most unforgettable moments. While recording The Great Gig in the Sky, the band realized something was missing. They needed a powerful female voice, but not for lyrics. They wanted raw emotion, pure feeling, and haunting vocal runs that could hit like another instrument. That's when engineer Alan Parsons brought in session singer Claire Torrey. He had worked with her before on a Top of the Pops cover project and knew she could deliver under pressure, and she absolutely did. Torrey arrived, heard Rick Wright's chord progression, and quickly understood the mood. She later told Classic Rock, "They explained the concept of the album to me and played me Rick Wright's chord sequence. The only thing I could think of was to make myself sound like an instrument. That instinct turned into music history." Parsons later told Rolling Stone, "There was no real direction. She just had to feel it." And that spontaneous approach paid off in a huge way. Torrey recorded her iconic performance in just 3 takes. 3. For that session, she earned £30 instead of her usual £15 because the recording happened on a Sunday. At the time, it was just another paid job to her. When she left the studio, she reportedly had no idea her vocals would actually make the final album, but she was completely mistaken. The band loved what she created and kept it on the record. The surprise came later when she bought the album herself and saw her name sitting in the credits. Imagine finding out that way. That situation didn't sit well with Claire Torrey. Her vocal part on The Great Gig in the Sky wasn't something handed to her note for note. She created that performance herself in the studio, shaping the emotional sound that became one of the album's most unforgettable moments. So years later, in 2004, she took legal action against Pink Floyd, asking for songwriting credit along with a share of the copyright and royalties connected to the track. She clearly had a strong case. Pink Floyd's label, EMI, agreed to settle the dispute out of court, and from that point on, The Great Gig in the Sky was officially credited to both Richard Wright and Claire Torrey. Not bad for a session that originally seemed like just another quick studio job. Pink Floyd wasn't just making songs on the dark side of the moon. They were chasing sounds that felt strange, unsettling, and completely different from what most rock bands were doing at the time. Engineer Alan Parsons was fully on board with that mission and kept finding creative ways to make the band's wild ideas actually work. Take On the Run, for example. To help create that anxious, chaotic atmosphere, David Gilmour played his guitar using a microphone stand in an unusual way, and Parsons manipulated the recording with reverse playback and delay effects to twist the sound into something eerie and intense. The result sounded almost like mechanical panic breaking loose. Even the footsteps in the track had their own weird origin story. Those unsettling walking sounds came from a studio staff member moving around inside an echo chamber. That kind of hands-on experimentation was just part of the process. And remember, this was long before digital editing made everything easy. If Pink Floyd wanted strange echoes or layered time effects, they had to build them the hard way. Parsons explained to Premier Guitar, "Every sort of time-based process was done with tape. There were no digital boxes then. We might have had as many as 5 or 6 tape machines doing various delays, reverb delays, and so on. That meant lots of gear, lots of trial and error, and a lot of patience." Then there's the iconic opening of Money. Those instantly recognizable cash sounds weren't pulled from some fancy software pack because that didn't exist. Nick Mason explained to Classic Rock, "I had drilled holes in old pennies and then threaded them onto strings." Roger Waters added to the sound collage by shaking a bowl full of coins. The ripping paper sound was created right in front of a microphone, while stock sound effects helped complete the famous cash register sequence. Old-school studio creativity at its finest. When Pink Floyd came together to record The Dark Side of the Moon, one major figure was missing. Syd Barrett, the band's original frontman and creative force, was no longer there. Years earlier, his struggles with serious mental health issues and heavy drug use had made it impossible for him to continue working with the group, and the band had made the painful decision to move forward without him. Barrett's departure left a deep mark on everyone involved. He largely stepped away from public life, and while the band still cared about him, the emotions around the situation were complicated, painful, and impossible to ignore. Those feelings found their way into the music, especially on Brain Damage. Roger Waters had actually started writing that track much earlier during the sessions for Metal Pink Floyd's previous studio album. At the time, it carried the working title Lunatic, but when The Dark Side of the Moon took shape around themes of pressure, fear, and fragile mental balance, the song suddenly fit perfectly. Waters later explained, "There is a residue of Syd in all of this. When you see that happening to someone you've been very close friends with, it concentrates one's mind on how ephemeral one's sensibilities and mental capacities can be." That emotional connection gave the album an even heavier layer beneath the experimental sound. Then there's On the Run, one of the album's most futuristic and restless tracks. Believe it or not, it didn't begin as that tense electronic experience people know today. Early on, Waters brought in an instrumental idea called the travel sequence. And at first it sounded much more like a loose jam with jazz and rock elements than the pulsing machine-driven track it became. But once the studio experimentation kicked in, everything changed. The song was transformed through endless tweaking, reshaping, and electronic layering until it became something far more ambitious. For 1972, this was seriously forward-thinking stuff. A big part of that shift came from Waters experimenting with the EMS VCS3 synthesizer, an early analog machine that helped push Pink Floyd deeper into electronic territory. That kind of gear was still relatively new, and the band knew there was a balance between creativity and becoming overly dependent on technology. In Pink Floyd, Live at Pompeii, Waters explained, "It's a danger that we could become slaves of all our equipment. But what we're trying to do is sort it all out so that we're not." That mindset helped shape the album's sound without letting the machines take over the music. And one of the strangest details about The Dark Side of the Moon isn't even musical at all. Those mysterious spoken voice clips scattered across the album. They're not actors, and they weren't scripted performances. They were real people giving spontaneous answers to uncomfortable, deeply personal questions. Those recordings were among the final pieces added to the album, mostly driven by Waters' idea. Speaking to Classic Rock, he recalled, "We did about 20 people. The interviewees all had cards with questions printed on them like, 'Have you ever been violent?' 'When was the last time you thumped someone?' That means some of the eerie voices woven into this legendary album came from random, honest reactions captured in the studio. A strange choice at the time, but one that made the record feel even more human, unsettling, and unforgettable. The list of interview subjects for The Dark Side of the Moon kept growing. Roger Waters wanted the spoken voice segments to feel real, raw, and completely unfiltered. So he pulled in just about anyone connected to the band during production. Studio staff, the Abbey Road doorman, road crew members, their partners, and other visitors all ended up answering those strange personal questions. Even Paul and Linda McCartney got pulled into the experiment. At the time, they were recording a Wings album in the same studio complex, so Waters had them take part too. But despite the star power, their responses never made the final album. Waters reportedly felt Paul was trying too hard to be amusing instead of giving the kind of natural reactions he wanted, so those recordings were left out. Then there's the album cover, one of the most recognizable images in music history. It looks incredibly simple at first glance, but that clean prism design became legendary. A single beam of white light enters a triangular prism and explodes into a rainbow of color. Simple idea, unforgettable impact. The design came from Storm Thorgerson, Pink Floyd's longtime visual collaborator. Even before the album was fully finished, the band brought him in to start developing ideas and played portions of the music for inspiration. But Thorgerson had his own creative method. He told Rolling Stone, "I never say anything really about the music. I just let it go over really, I suppose. It's my job to reinterpret it. With Dark Side, it was very much about the madness of the lyrics. Instead of directly translating the songs, he aimed to capture the feeling behind them. Wright had given him one unusual instruction: no funny pictures. That pushed Thorgerson towards something cleaner, sharper, and more symbolic. The prism concept was partly inspired by the dramatic light shows used during early Dark Side of the Moon live performances. Thorgerson explained, the other thing was the triangle. I think the triangle, which is a symbol of thought and ambition, was very much a subject of Roger's lyrics. That made the final image feel like more than just a cool design. It became a visual shortcut for the album's deeper themes. And believe it or not, that now famous prism almost wasn't the cover at all. The band rejected another Thorgerson concept that involved a photo rendering of the comic book character, the Silver Surfer. Imagine how different music history would look if that had made the cut. Then came one of the weirdest fan theories ever attached to the album. In the late 1990s, a bizarre rumor exploded across the United States. According to believers, if you started The Dark Side of the Moon at exactly the right moment while watching the 1939 film The Wizard of Oz, the album would line up in eerie ways with what was happening on screen. The most famous version claimed you had to start the record on the third roar of the MGM Lion. From there, fans pointed out scene after scene where lyrics, mood changes, or musical moments seemed to match the movie in strange ways. Some people became convinced Pink Floyd had secretly planned the whole thing. A coincidence? A fan-created myth? Or one of rock music's strangest legends? The theory refused to die. And to make the whole Dark Side of the Rainbow story even stranger, fans claimed this incredible sync-up had been hidden in plain sight until amateur detectives pieced it together years later. One of the so-called proof moments people pointed to was Dorothy carefully balancing along the top of a fence, just as Gilmour sings "Balanced on the Biggest Wave." For believers, that was way too perfect to ignore. So, was Pink Floyd secretly building a soundtrack for The Wizard of Oz all along? Not even close. The biggest problem with that theory is simple. For something like that to be intentionally planned, the band would have needed access to in-studio video playback technology that just wasn't available during the album's production in 1972. That alone tears a huge hole in the whole story. Engineer Alan Parsons shut the idea down when he told Rolling Stone, "If you play any record with the sound turned down on the TV, you'll find things that work." In other words, when people want patterns badly enough, they usually find them. Still, maybe that's part of what makes The Dark Side of the Moon so fascinating. It's an album that keeps pulling people into theories, debates, and strange interpretations decades later. And somehow, the story didn't end there. In 2023, a full 50 years after the album first changed rock history, Roger Waters revisited the project in a completely different way. Now 80 years old at the time, he released a re-recorded version called The Dark Side of the Moon Redux, saying his perspective on the album's themes had changed with age and experience. In a press release, Waters explained, "The original Dark Side of the Moon feels in some ways like the lament of an elder being on the human condition. Clearly the message hasn't stuck. That's why I started to consider what the wisdom of an 80-year-old could bring to a reimagined version." This new version didn't involve the rest of Pink Floyd. Instead, Waters worked with studio musicians to rebuild the album from his own viewpoint. That decision sparked plenty of conversation, especially given his comments suggesting the original message had not been fully understood. Waters even stated, "Not enough people recognized what it's about, what it was I was saying then." And just like that, even after half a century, The Dark Side of the Moon was still creating debate, mystery, and fresh headlines. If you made it this far, drop a comment and let's talk. What's your favorite track from The Dark Side of the Moon? And do you think the Wizard of Oz sync theory is just a weird coincidence or one of rock's greatest myths? If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more deep dives into legendary music stories. See you in the next video.